Welcome to today's webcast. This call is being recorded. And now to begin the program, I'd like to introduce Chris Flack. Please go ahead.
Hey, thanks so much, and welcome everybody in our audience to today's webcast, Rethinking Disaster Recovery, The Cloud Changes Everything, brought to you by Virtualization Review and sponsored by Infrascale. I'm Chris Flack with with Virtualization Review, and I'm here to be your host for today's event, so thank you all for joining today's event. Okay, so briefly before we begin today's event and get all the fun started, just a couple reminders to start out today's presentation. So first thing is we are recording today's event for future viewing and listening purposes. We'll send you a link to the email you registered with within 24 to 48 hours after today's webcast. Please feel free to share that link with coworkers, colleagues, friends, anybody who may be interested on today's topic. We would appreciate that. You can actually go down to the dock of your screen right now and click on the little paper airplane icon, and you can actually refer a colleague via the link there, and they'll come join you in the console. You guys can hang out together and watch the show. It'll be a lot of fun, so we suggest that you do that. We also will have a Q&A session at the end of today's program. However, we encourage you at any point, if you have a question for our presenter, to please enter it via the Ask a Question box. And hopefully, if time permits, we'll get to everybody's questions and get out all the answers that we can. But please feel free to enter your questions at any time. We really encourage it. Joining us for today's webcast, we have a really great presenter. His name is Stefan Fima. Stefan has 20 years of experience in leading technology and product management teams at both tech startups and large software companies. Prior to joining Infrascale, he led efforts to make PathLogix an industry leader in the enterprise security space, to be recognized by Gartner and purchased by Oracle. That's cool. He is fluent in French and Spanish and received a BS in aerospace and mechanical engineering from UCLA and an MBA from Columbia University. He is passionate about aeronautics and holds a personal pilot's license. That's very cool. Briefly, before we get things started with today's webcast, just to cover the agenda briefly, we're going to talk about the advantages of cloud to start the webcast, and we're going to talk about how the cloud changes disaster recovery. We're going to talk about what Infrascale can do for you when it comes to the cloud and security, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. But first thing is we wanted to get a little bit of participation with everybody in the audience to kind of see where everybody was at for today. So if you could participate in the following poll, that would be great. So the following poll question is, how many of you are using the cloud for more than 50% of your business applications? You can choose yes, no, or you're really not worried so much about the cloud and you don't have many business applications up there. So feel free to respond to any of those questions. And at this time, while you guys are answering, please, Stefan, why don't you join me? And typically, do you see more than 50% of your people using the cloud for business applications? What do you typically see to the answer to this kind of question that you ask?
For me, I see a good distribution. There's a lot of people that are still, using basically all in-house systems. There's a very strong move towards the cloud, depending, typically what industry people are in. But yeah, definitely we see a lot of growth in people using cloud services for both, primary computing as well as secondary.
All right, excellent. Let me see here. We've got some results here. 30% saying yes. We've got 6% of our audience representing no, and 13.3% actually reporting back that they don't have possibly any or are not worried about the cloud information right now. So thank you all for responding to today's poll. And without any further ado, I will hand things over to our presenter of the day so that way he can get started with advantages of the cloud. So please take the floor and get started with your presentation.
Great, thank you. So again, today we're going to cover three topics. First off, we're going to cover sort of just general advantages of the cloud for whatever purpose you might want to use cloud-based computing. Then we're going to drill down and talk about the advantages of cloud-based computing as applied to disaster recovery. And then finally, we're going to wind up a little bit by talking about Infrascale and what advantages we might bring to you. So the adoption of cloud services, especially public cloud infrastructure, has obviously been growing a lot. You can look at pretty much any forecast from leading industry analysts. You can talk to some of the leading public cloud providers, and everybody will tell you that the cloud usage is growing very quickly. In fact, many times you see analysts that are like revising their forecasts upward as to the adoption of cloud. And so, this obviously leads to the question, well, why? What's driving this? And there are basically three reasons that drive this, and these are what we can call the three major advantages of cloud services. The first one is cost savings. Second one is flexibility, and these are the two that most people tend to think of. And then thirdly, maybe one that people think a little bit less of is security and privacy. And we'll dive into each of these in a little bit more detail right now. So let's talk first about cost savings. So when we compare the two options of either standing up new computing infrastructure, buying servers and networking and everything else, versus using a cloud-based infrastructure to do the exact same thing, with a cloud-based service, typically you are turning on the service on a either pay-as-you-go basis or on a regular monthly fee. And you don't have typically either any or very much upfront fee for turning this on. Now, obviously, this depends on exactly what kind of cloud service you're using. If you're using a pure infrastructure as a service cloud offering, this tends to be the case. If you're using a application level service, such as a CRM system or something like that, you may have initial configuration fees that you would have in either case, whether you're doing something in-house or with the cloud. But typically what happens is that, with the cloud, you tend to save all the upfront money. You also will save on physical infrastructure costs. If you buy computers and servers and everything else, you've got to put them somewhere. Depending on how you're standing this up, you may have to, fit out a special data center room. You may have to acquire additional real estate, whether you buy it or lease it. So those infrastructure costs don't exist by definition with a cloud-based service where all of that is provided as part of the service. The other thing, and this is important for some people, is they may not be able to spend on a capital expenditure budget to acquire additional computing resource, but could, on an operating expense budget, fund things month to month if they needed to do so. In our experience, this tends to differ by industry. State and local government, we find, especially for our services, they tend to like to buy more upfront using capital budgets, whereas in private industry, we see more of an even mix. Some people want to go capital. A lot of people are very happy to do just straight off the operating expense budget. Another thing that happens is a lot of the operational costs that you would otherwise spend on internally, maintaining servers, upgrading servers, troubleshooting, same with the software that runs on them, all that is taken care of as part of your flat subscription fee in general cloud services, and so you tend to reduce your costs there as well. You can also have much faster rollouts and implementations that therefore cost you less money. If you want to stand up a brand new virtual instance of a computing environment just to try something out, you can do that literally with a few clicks, as opposed to having to manually physically deploy new server hardware, install software licenses, operating systems, applications, and so on. License management. We tend not to think about these things, but if you have your own equipment in-house, you have to manage all the licenses and pay for the licenses and the annual software maintenance that goes with those licenses. With a cloud-based service, all of that is taken care of for you. And again, maintenance costs. If you have to maintain the hardware, failed drives, failed RAID cards, things like this. These are all things that in a public cloud service environment, especially in what one might call a no operations environment, where all this is being taken care of for you, a no ops environment as it's called. This stuff is what you pay for as part of your service. You don't pay this separately, as opposed to in your own in-house environments, you'll be paying that stuff as incurred. Automatic updates, anytime you have software updates, all that stuff's taken care of automatically for you. You can capture economies of scale. This is interesting, right? Because especially for small and medium businesses or small to medium enterprise, you tend to be buying things as you need them one by one. When you come under a cloud service, that provider is buying at volume and buying at scale, whether we're talking about computing, storage, networking, or whatever. And a lot of those cost savings get passed on to you in the form of lower fees to use the cloud-based service. On-demand pricing. So when you stand up infrastructure for yourself, you pay for the servers, the software and everything else that goes with it, and you pay for it whether you use it or not. Whereas with many cloud-based services, you can ramp up and ramp down your usage and pay only on demand. And therefore, you're being much more efficient with the funds and to only pay for what you're actually using. And then lastly, pay as you grow. If you see that your need for computing resources is going to grow over time, if you're buying and installing equipment on-prem, you're going to buy for more than what you need right now. You're going to buy for your projected use in 1, 2, 3, 4 years from now. Okay? And so that is upfront cost that you incur that you won't be getting the benefit for until later on. Whereas with cloud-based services, you can start small, grow, you can come down again if you have to, and basically only pay for what you need as you need it. So that kind of summarizes, a lot of the different elements that contribute to cost savings that, people can realize in general using cloud-based services. The second major advantage that people get is flexibility, right? So I mentioned the cost aspect of being able to ramp up and ramp down services, but the flexibility of being able to do such a thing, right? If your computing needs ramp up and down over time, you can scale up and scale down very, very flexibly in cloud-based services. And depending on the particular service provider you're using, you can scale up or down, based on a month, based on a week, based on an hour, or even based on demand minute by minute. The other thing you can do is you can distribute or consolidate workloads. A lot of times you may have workloads that, say on-premise hardware are distributed across a number of different machines, but they don't really need to be. It's just that that's where they happen to be installed. Whereas in a cloud-based environment, you can consolidate all of that quite easily in order to economize expense and bring things into a more manageable environment. Conversely, you might want to be able to distribute it. If you have workloads you want to distribute, say, geographically to zones that are more, that are closer to your ultimate end users, you can do that as well. You have anytime, anywhere access. The cloud, especially public clouds, are available anywhere. Anybody with an internet connection can get to it. And so this is an additional flexibility in terms of, geographic availability of your applications to anybody who needs them. Better collaboration is another strong benefit of the cloud, especially if you're using cloud-based applications. For example, even just simple cloud-based office applications like spreadsheets or word processing or presentation slides. How many times have we all been putting together a spreadsheet and we email it around to the 5 people that have to make edits, and then they send back their versions, and we now have 5 versions in our email inbox to merge back into one to make further edits and then send it out again for a second review. When this is done online, this is all done collaboratively on the same document, even live, and it saves all that round trip of versioning and really enhances the way we collaborate with documents. And along with versioning comes centralized document control. You can very easily turn on and off who has access to documents, what changes they can make to those documents. This is all stuff that you get when you use cloud services, which is much harder to do if you're doing this sort of offline with on-prem typical in computing. Cloud, you can have public or private options, right? Depending on the security posture of your organization, if you're a government agency or whatnot, you might have to use either a private cloud or a government-specified cloud like a GovCloud type-based solution. All of these are options. So with all of this, what you can get is things like faster time to market. Let's say you want to come out with a new offering, a new product. You can test it out very quickly. You can A/B test many different things very quickly and see what works. The other thing you can do, and these are more strategic benefits that people don't necessarily think about when they first get into cloud services, but afterwards, once they're in them, they realize some new benefits that maybe were not originally envisioned. So, for example, let's suppose you want to enter or exit a new line of business, right? And so you want to be able to spin up a whole IT infrastructure for a new particular business unit. You can spin that up much more quickly if you're doing it in a virtual environment or a cloud-based environment than you can if you're going to do all that with in-house equipment. And then lastly, another strategic benefit is smoother merger and acquisitions. I know, for example, in the case of Infrascale, we recently acquired a company a couple of years ago, and they were using cloud-based applications for CRM and other things, as were we, and that made the consolidation of the IT very, very smooth. right? We didn't have to worry about exporting and importing data and converting applications and all that. Turns out we were using very similar applications and could easily move data over and consolidate systems. So these are some of the benefits in general that are available in terms of a more flexible use of computing when using cloud-based infrastructure. And depending what organizations and industries you guys are in, you may have even yet different ones on top of this. So the next general benefit that comes from cloud services is security. And this one's kind of interesting because oftentimes people are concerned that maybe security will go down by using cloud services. And although there's always the risk of security weakness, the cloud does bring a number of strengths to the security posture of an organization. So for example, one of the very first things it can do is it can consolidate data that otherwise would tend to live on endpoints. So, if one of your employees loses a laptop in a taxi cab or on an airplane with all sorts of data that's on that laptop, that's data leakage, and depending on the nature of that data, that could be compromising. Whereas in a cloud-based environment, if more and more of the data is actually kept centrally in the cloud and accessed via the endpoint, even if that endpoint is lost, less data is potentially compromised. So that's one very good advantage of the cloud, along with the ability to centrally monitor usage of cloud-based data. So if you keep a lot of your documents online in a cloud-based environment, check in, check out, versioning, who had access, who last read and wrote that file, who deleted files, all the stuff is easy to do. Forensic readiness is another one. You could have, as opposed to having to stand up a dedicated forensic machine in case you've had particular breaches or other issues, here in a cloud-based environment, you can spin something up instantly and be ready to go. The other thing you can do is, let's suppose that you've had a machine that's been compromised. It's been infected by a virus, or maybe something else has gotten there. If this is a physical machine, you have to get to the machine to then, copy everything over or acquire a full image of that, or even take that machine offline in order to acquire and transfer the evidence. Whereas with a in a cloud-based environment, you can clone it immediately and have a copy of that exactly as it is, and take care of that very, very quickly. It also means that you then have less downtime due to having to bring down a server in order to acquire the evidence in case of an issue. Right? Here, it can all be done very, very quickly. Other things that can happen is you can keep centralized logs, and you can also allocate sufficient storage for them. Oftentimes what happens when we're running physical servers and we keep logs, we don't account for the amount of data storage required for all these logs. And so we tend to trim the amount of logs that we keep and how detailed we keep these logs. With public cloud infrastructure, you can scale the storage and grow it as you need it and be able to keep more log information, which allow you to have more information in case you do need to investigate a security issue. And these can now be, more efficiently indexed, allowing you to comb through these much more quickly. You can do things like pre-create or secure hardened builds and do this all offline before you actually roll out a new instance. You can patch builds offline as opposed to trying to do it online or on the real machine. You can patch them offline, make sure everything is still secure, and then roll it out. It's easier to test the impact of security changes before you actually move them live. Most cloud, in fact all cloud infrastructure, the providers that provide cloud-based services, their data centers, because they make a business out of this, right? They do all sorts of things that small, medium businesses or even small, medium enterprise may not be able to do for themselves. So strong perimeter access to the data center, physical access control, biometric access, strong employee screening, surveillance, be it physical surveillance with cameras and CCTVs or online surveillance, whatever. They do this as normal course of their business in order to gain and retain clients. Thorough and frequent auditing, another thing that they often do. They have to do this in order to be in business, and these kinds of audits for a small medium enterprise could take a lot of time, whereas for these companies they have to do this just as part of doing business. Okay, so we've just talked about, in general, the benefits of cloud services and cloud infrastructure. So now, with that as a background, let's talk about what does this mean for disaster recovery, right? How does everything I've just said apply to disaster recovery and more specifically, disaster recovery as a service. And very much like the three major benefits of the cloud, these same three benefits apply to DR. So, cost-effective, flexible, and security, right? And so here, what the cloud does is make disaster recovery much more affordable, as I'll show you in a slide or two. It makes you able to fail over or bring up a DR environment much more quickly. And it provides some additional security benefits, and we'll talk about one particular security threat as well. So first of all, let's talk about just disaster recovery in terms of cost, the amount of money you spend in order to be able to recover your systems when something happens, right? And traditionally what's happened is that the quicker you want to be able to recover, the more money you have to spend. So in the older days, right, and we still have, many customers that, have been using tape backup systems. Tape backup systems are, relatively cheap these days. You don't spend a lot of money. But if you have to recover from tape, it could take you a long time to do so, right? The next step up was moving to things like cloud backup, with the advent of the internet, where now it costs you a little bit more maybe, and your recovery time came down. If it was just a file or two, it might come down from days to minutes and seconds. If it was entire systems and you had to bring back a whole set of files, that might take you still several hours. But still, that's better than, for example, waiting 3 days to get the tape out of the vault, bringing it back, loading it up, hoping it works, and then restoring the data. Moving up from there, you could go to things like dedicated backup appliances, right, which ingest data much more quickly, can restore much more quickly, are typically installed on-premise on your corporate network so as to take advantage of the higher bandwidth you'll have on your network typically. So they cost more, but your recovery time goes down yet again. Then you get to sort of really higher order solutions, right? So you might stand up either a cold site, a warm site, or a hot site, which is really a duplicate of the infrastructure that you already have in case something goes wrong with your primary infrastructure. And the trick with second sites is that if they're not already running constantly up to date with what your production system is, there's a high likelihood that when you need it, it's not exactly mirroring what you have in production. But nonetheless, even if it was, it still costs a lot of money, right? And maybe the largest banks in the world can afford to have redundant systems just sitting there and waiting because they absolutely have to be up and running, and if something goes down, they have to recover in seconds. Everybody else who may have the same kinds of needs, this is impossible. They just can't, the budgets just don't afford it. So this has been the traditional sort of economic trade-off that we've all had to make. So something changes that, really. And what's changed is, we want the nirvana, right? We want to spend a little bit of money, not a lot of money, and we want to be able to recover in seconds, okay, not in days. And what makes that possible is two things. One is the internet and the cloud, and the second is virtualization technology. With those two things, with virtualization technology, we can take physical systems and virtualize them and run them in other infrastructure, such as in the cloud. And with cloud-based infrastructure, we can now share the cost of that infrastructure among many, many users so that not any one company has to pay for all of the IT hardware and everything else required just in case. So to explain this in yet a different way or more detailed way, in the old way you'd have on-premise production hardware with servers, databases, load balancers, networks, and everything else, and that would cost you a certain amount of money. And then if you were going to go the full distance, you would have a duplicate instance of that site. You'd have secondary data center with servers and databases and load balancers and everything else. And then you'd have to pay for the human beings to be able to operate that. And then if you had an issue and you had to fail over from your production hardware to your backup, your second site, sure enough, you would be ideally able to fail over in less than a minute. And that would cost you a lot of money. In the new way, you have your existing on-premise servers, databases, load balancers, and everything else. Only now, instead of having a second site, you have a hybrid cloud solution that includes an on-premise hardware component and a cloud-based component. And so all of your systems that you want to be able to protect with disaster recovery as a service are replicated into this hybrid cloud environment, which costs you a lot less than if you had to stand up dedicated infrastructure. You then still have some operating expense, although most of that is included in the service, and you can fail over, maybe not in 1 minute, but in 15 minutes or less, okay, which is still very, very good. And you do this for basically a 10-to-1 cost reduction, right? The price you will pay as a service for this kind of approach to give you almost the same kind of recovery time will be 10-to-1 less. So to explain a little bit more graphically, I guess, sort of, how disaster recovery as a service works and where's the benefit, what I'm showing here is a slide with sort of 3 different approaches, right? So there's backup with tape, backup onto disk, and then disaster recovery. So with traditional tape backup, we take a backup of our systems and then we store them off-site. And then if a disaster happens, which could be as small as having a hard drive crash on one of my servers, or as big as a hurricane flowing through my area and wiping out my entire computer site, I have to go and retrieve the tapes, load them on, on my computing system if it's still available, restore the data, and then hopefully get back up and running. And this whole process could take hours and days. I can do the exact same thing if I've got disk-based backup, whether it's a backup appliance, whether it is a cloud-based solution. But if I'm just doing backup, I'm backing up the data, and then when something happens, I'm going to restore the data. I might have to rebuild my servers first before I restore the data, right? And once I've done all that, and that could take hours or days depending on the, the nature of the disaster, then I'm back up and running. What disaster recovery does is put the running process up front. So we take a backup of the entire system. We prepare it to be able to be run in a virtual environment right as we do that backup. So that if a disaster happens, again, whether just a computer goes down or your entire site goes down, you can immediately run a virtual replica, a virtual machine of that system and be back up and running. And then restore back to your production systems in your own time after the disaster has passed. So in this fashion, we can have you back up and running in minutes as opposed to hours or days. All right, hold on, where's slides? There we go. All right, so to show you how this works in a bit of a flow of step-by-step, let's suppose we have end users who are working on systems. So when we install the disaster recovery as a service, there is an on-premise appliance that gets installed and a cloud-based service that gets turned on. Systems are captured and virtualized onto the local appliance. So we capture a full image of those systems. We virtualize those images so that they can be run locally on the appliance. And we replicate all of that to the cloud. So what this means is that there are 2 copies of your production systems, one locally on a local appliance and one remotely in the cloud. So this gives you redundant dual storage of your systems. Then let's suppose we have a small disaster, a micro disaster as we like to call it, where one of your servers goes down and the user no longer has access to the applications on that server. Well, the administrator can immediately go onto that appliance, hit the failover button, and then what we will do is automatically spin up a virtual replica of that system right on the appliance, and the user can keep on working with that replica of those systems until the production system is back up. Let's suppose, however, that we now have a site-wide disaster where all of the computer systems are down, which also means that the local appliance is probably down or unavailable as well. And in that case, the user can't get to anything. And so in that case, the administrator can go to the cloud and literally hit a failover button. In that case, we will spin up all of the environment, including the networking and orchestrating when particular systems come up in what sequence and all that, so that the user can again get back up and running. And in this case, users will keep running using the cloud-based instances of the applications until such time as the system admins have brought back up the production systems, in which case then, all of the system, all the data and the systems have been, running in the cloud will get failed back to the production environment. So the Infrascale disaster recovery solution is exactly this kind of a solution. And some things that make us very unique in offering this service is, number one, it's an all-inclusive subscription service for one flat price, right? It's a monthly price that you pay, and that includes the cloud service, whether you want to use the Infrascale cloud, you want to use public clouds or private cloud. It includes the on-premise appliance of whatever configuration is required. It includes seeding the cloud with the initial copies of your systems, if that's required, phone support, configuration, implementation, training, onboarding, unlimited testing, and disaster declarations. So if you have to, you install the service and you want to test it to make sure it works out, and you want to test it once a year, or you want to test it once a month, all of that is included as part of the fee. And let's suppose, unfortunately, you have a disaster. Maybe a server goes down, maybe your entire site goes down. Whether it's 1 day, 30 days, or 60 days, all of that is included. Comprehensive system coverage, so Windows, Linux servers, VMware, Hyper-V environments, whether it's failing over locally or in the cloud, individual systems or a whole group of systems, all that is included. And yes, of course, backup and archiving of just regular file and folder data and databases, all that is also included in this one flat price. So that makes this a very, very compelling and affordable service, especially for small, medium business, small, medium enterprise, who maybe don't have the larger budgets that would otherwise be required. Okay, so let's get to the third benefit, which is security. So in the case of disaster recovery, I'm going to focus for this webinar on ransomware. I'm sure by now everybody's heard about ransomware. Literally, you have two choices if you're infected. You can either pay the ransom or try and restore your systems before the infection so as to avoid paying the ransom. And obviously, we'd rather avoid paying the ransom if we could. So in our cloud backup product, we go the full distance of not just providing backups, but also providing automation to be able to detect anomalies in the files as they're being backed up, to detect possibly if there's been massive changes in encryption of files, which would indicate the presence of ransomware. And we do this automatically and proactively so as to detect ransomware before you get hit up for the ransom rather than afterwards. And that's great for files and folders. When it gets to full systems, however, there's another alternative. If I'm just doing backup and I get infected by ransomware, I have to power down the machine. I have to determine when that infection happened. I have to rebuild the server, reconfigure the services, restore clean files, inject the old database, and basically get everything back up and running step by step. I'm basically rebuilding a machine, right? And that takes time. And during that time, you're down, right? You are not doing business. With disaster recovery as a service, there's another way to do it, which is the minute you're infected, you can power down that machine. You can determine the time of the date, of the infection. You can log into the DRAS dashboard in our cloud service, and you can boot a virtual replica of that machine to be back up immediately. What you can even do is, if you've been taking regular backups of these machines and you don't quite know exactly when you were infected, you can step back in recovery points very, very quickly and check, does this particular recovery point work, or is this one infected? And you can step through them very, very quickly until you find the one where everything runs normally and restore that. And so in doing this, you can bring down your downtime due to ransomware infection from hours down to minutes. And this is a unique capability that comes out of using disaster recovery as a service. Okay, so now we have a poll, which I'll let Chris take over.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll let you take a breather for a second there. Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation so far. We've got another poll question here for everybody in today's presentation. Poll question is, which problem are you primarily looking to address with the cloud? Disaster recovery, ransomware mitigation, compliance headaches. So please choose from the following, and we'll give everybody another couple seconds to answer the question here. In the meantime, don't forget, everybody, we will have a Q&A session at the end, so please feel free, if you haven't already, to start asking your questions. And while we wait for the answers for this particular poll, what do you see currently there, Stefan? What do you see when people answer this question? Usually they choose disaster recovery, ransomware mitigation. What do you usually see when you ask your colleagues and your clients this question?
Well, typically the question that we're asking is, is it backup, is it disaster recovery, is it both, is it ransomware? And the answers that we tend to see are that there's a lot of people that start out just thinking about backup, right? Maybe, they're still using tape backup and they're just looking to move to a modern backup solution. And then we explain to them what disaster recovery is, especially disaster recovery as a service. And it's kind of news to them, and they like it, and so their desire, what problems they want to address expands. Separately, we have a number of customers or clients where it's all about ransomware. Maybe they've been infected or they haven't been infected, but they want to prevent against it, and that's sort of its own thing. And then compliance, that just sort of tends to be something that rolls along with, whether it's backup, DR, or whatever, that just sort of comes along with it based upon what industry they're in.
All right, excellent. We got some results here. It seems that we have 75% of the audience today. They're looking to address disaster recovery with the cloud, or excuse me, 71%, 19% for ransomware mitigation, and 9.5% for compliance headaches. So thank you all for your participation. You guys really are great with this. Thank you so much. All right, I'll let you get back into your presentation here.
Excellent. So now to sort of the last part of the presentation is really more about Infrascale and why Infrascale, right? Basically, every modern company depends on data and depends on their computer systems being up in order to do business, right? And I really can't think of any exception to that rule. And so because companies depend on being, uptime, and that really has become our mission. Our mission is to eradicate downtime and data loss. Downtime, the system's going down, data loss due to losing data, data not being available due to being hijacked by ransomware. This really is our mission. And we do this across the globe. We do this for over 50,000 customers, protecting over 1 million devices from endpoints, from mobile phones on up to big servers. And we do this in partnership with over 900 service provider and reseller and integrator partners. And what you see on this map here, every dot represents a customer that we're protecting. And so there's probably not a spot on the globe where we're not protecting somebody against data loss and or system downtime. And the way we tend to look at it is that, any organization really has sort of 4 layers of data and systems. We tend to think about it in terms of a pyramid. Now you've got endpoints way out at the periphery. You may have remote and branch offices. You may have a headquarters core data center, and then right at the core, you may have some mission-critical apps, which absolutely cannot go down. And what we find is that many organizations spend a fair amount of time on the core apps because they know they have to, but oftentimes are inadvertently exposed on the remote offices and the endpoints, right? And so the way we tend to look at it is you got to do both, right? You really have to protect everything. And there's not that many alternatives in the industry, for a company that really spans the full gamut. And Infrascale is one of them, that really, whether you're talking about endpoints, data protection, or you're talking about core systems and ensuring against downtime, that provides a full solution, and we do that. And we do that with 2 products, Infrascale Cloud Backup and Infrascale Disaster Recovery. And today's webinar has been primarily focused on Infrascale Disaster Recovery, but we also offer a direct-to-cloud backup product for backing up data files, primarily on endpoints and remote offices and branch office servers. Both products are cloud-based. Both products will back up data. Disaster Recovery will back up entire systems as well. Both products will allow you to recover data and or systems in seconds. And both of them are really cloud-based solutions. And with this, we can protect really the whole panoply of devices that you'll have, from mobile devices to desktops and laptops, physical servers, as well as virtual machines and virtual environments. So really from the smallest to the biggest, we'll cover you there. Regardless of what the environment might be. It might be Windows, it might be Mac, it might be Android or Mac OS. Might be running a VMware virtual environment, might be running Hyper-V environment, might be running Linux machines or Unix machines. So we really cover a whole gamut of the environment, which typically covers everything that we see out there with organizations that we work with. We take security very strongly. So for example, anytime we're working with data, it's always encrypted, both at rest, on-prem, in transit, and in the cloud. And we have additionally secure options where data can be encrypted at the source with user keys so that Infrascale really has zero knowledge of the data. There's no way we can get to the data even if we wanted to. We provide flexibility in terms of cloud services. You can obviously work with the Infrascale cloud, which is great, but you might choose to go with a private cloud or a third-party cloud, such as an Amazon or an Azure or a Google or a Gov cloud of some kind, right? We provide the flexibility of allowing you to go wherever you need to go. And in all cases, everything is going to be encrypted. We have options for multi-factor authentication. The data centers, especially the ones that we use, all have very strong access controls and strong certifications, such as the ones you see on bottom, as well as procedures and processes in place to make sure that everything is secure. Okay, so let me wrap up by saying that, Infrascale, we really help you with 3 problems. We help you with eradicating the downtime that you may have from disasters. We help you eradicate data loss with backup. And we help you eradicate the possibility of your data being hijacked by ransomware. And so with that, Chris, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you so much for your presentation. We have another poll question here for everybody in the audience while we close out the webcast today. So now, if you wouldn't mind just sitting back and answering this poll question, would you like to learn more about Infrascale's backup and disaster recovery solutions? Yes, I'd like to learn more, or not yet, but maybe later. So choose one of those 2 options. I'll keep this up while we get to the Q&A session here, so that way everybody has a chance to answer the poll question. Okay, so let's see here. We will jump right into the Q&A session right here while we got some time left. Okay, let's see. Dominic in the audience is asking, can MSPs offer this and rebrand it to customers?
So MSPs can absolutely offer this. Our cloud backup solution is fully rebrandable. Our Infrascale disaster recovery solution normally is only partially rebrandable, but we can obviously talk about that with the right partner.
I got a question here. I have 400 terabytes of data to protect. Can you guys handle this, or should I look elsewhere?
So we can definitely handle this, and depending on whether that data was all in one location or distributed across many locations, and what kinds of devices it is on, is this a collection of 1,000 endpoints, or is this one massive server? We might recommend you either use our cloud backup solution or our disaster recovery solution, or maybe a mixture of both, depending on the topology of that data.
So you got another question here. Don't forget, if you haven't asked your question already, please feel free to fill it in the Ask a Question box on the left-hand side of your screen right there. Okay, question here. Do you support Linux or Unix?
So the answer is yes. For Linux systems, we support backup of the systems as well as disaster recovery for those systems. For Unix systems, we support the backup of those systems. And we cover all the major versions of Unix that are out there.
We've got a question here. This person's saying, I'm a long-time tape backup user. I've been a little hesitant to advance my technology. Should I continue with tape or upgrade to a DRAS failover offering, do you think, for this person?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'd have to know more about exactly, what the kind of business they're in and the goals they're trying to achieve and so on. If this person is just looking to do, data backup, I would obviously argue that they should be moving to, a cloud-based backup solution or a hybrid cloud-based backup solution, if only because the time it will take them to recover their data will shrink from, hours down to seconds. If they're looking to do disaster recovery, then the only option is to go to a DR-based solution. There's nothing about tape backup that will let you boot systems other than by restoring the data. So there you have really no choice. So yes, it depends on the goals of the user. I think that in any case, moving to a digital backup solution would be much better than staying on tape. And in case of DR, it's the only way to go.
When you were talking about disaster recovery, will the machines need an OS first, or is it set up to do a bare metal restore?
So I assume this is about the recovery, and the recovery can be set up to do a bare metal restore.
question here. Lonnie was curious if you could just expand a little bit and address how both business continuity and disaster recovery are viable.
So I'm going to have to interpret the question a little bit because I'm not sure what was meant by saying are viable. So in terms of viable, does this work? Yes, it absolutely works. I mean, we have any number of customers that use our solutions for disaster recovery, and it works. Usually when we roll out a new client, we install, the on-premise hardware, we configure the cloud, we get their systems replicated and running, and we run through an entire disaster recovery test with them as part of the handoff process so that they know that this will work. Let me expand on this in a slightly different interpretation of viable, i.e., what does it mean to have a viable DR and business continuity plan, right? And business continuity spans a lot more than just computer systems, right? It includes things like phone systems, procedures, access to physical sites in case that site's no longer available, keeping track of where your employees are if they can't come in the office, and all that good stuff. So, a broad-based business continuity plan encompasses a lot of things. A component of that is continuity for computing systems, and how you achieve that continuity is obviously the broad question. Disaster recovery looks at it from a point of view of, when things go down, how do I get you back up immediately or as fast as possible? And so disaster recovery of IT systems is an element of an overarching business continuity plan. So, one could debate, should I start with a broad BC plan and then implement piece at a time, or should I start with my most critical elements and make sure I can recover those and then work out to a broad-based plan? That depends, I'm sure, on the company and what they're trying to accomplish. In our case, we focus, primarily on the IT side of things. That's our specialty. And so when we're working with companies, we're really focused on that. And our goal there is to make sure that regardless of whatever business continuity plans they have or don't have, if something goes wrong, they can get their systems back up and running in minutes.
Question here, do you have nonprofit pricing structures available?
We don't have formal nonprofit pricing structures available, and the reason for that is that we feel that our pricing is already so aggressive and economical that it meets the needs of nonprofits. We have a number of educational institutions and universities and other groups like that use our services, and we've always been able to accommodate their budgets. So, we will definitely be able to take care of, a nonprofit who wanted to work with us.
Person in the audience was curious, do you think other vendors provide ransomware detection as well? Is that something that's common?
To my knowledge, there's almost no one else that does it. There may be one or two. We were the first, we know, because we track this, in terms of actually detecting ransomware. Now, let me sort of expand on that. When it comes to dealing with ransomware, the best approach is a multi-layered approach, right? And the first line of defense should be good antivirus software. And good antivirus software is going to detect or should detect ransomware, right? But just like anything else, there's always, new exploits every single day, and, antivirus has to keep up with it. So you need a second layer of defense. And so what we do in terms of proactively detecting ransomware is a second line of defense that should come after you have good antivirus. And so at that second layer, we pioneered the idea of doing proactive detection of ransomware while doing backup at the same time. And so we were there first, and I think I see now on the internet other people beginning to make claims around this. But to my knowledge, we're the only ones that are really viably doing this.
I got a question here. This person is asking, are your services applicable for both hot and cold site DR?
I mean, yes, they are applicable, but to the extent you're using disaster recovery service, you can save the money on a hot site or cold site or warm site DR. I mean, the whole reason for using disaster recovery as a service is to avoid having to spend all that money on those sites that you'll probably use, very, very infrequently. But yes, if somebody wanted to work with us in that kind of a scenario, we could do it.
Question here. Do you leverage data dedupe, and what sort of dedupe efficiency do you get?
We do leverage data deduplication. Depending on the nature of the data, we can get anywhere between 5 to 1, 10 to 1, maybe even 30 to 1 dedupe ratios, depending again on the nature of the data that we're talking about. And actually, to expand on that, we leverage data deduplication in a number of ways. Traditionally in the industry, people use data deduplication in order to economize the amount of disk storage on a local appliance or server when protecting data. And we do that as well. We go further than that and also use deduplication for moving data between the on-premise location and our cloud, so that by deduping across the wide area network, we minimize the traffic and increase the effective throughput of data that we move to the cloud. And that also yields us an additional 10 to 1 improvement in our operations. So literally, the amount of data that we can put through the net to get to our cloud is 10 to 1 in what it would be without data deduplication.
Got a question here. Are there any overage costs in the cloud as limits are met? And if I go over capacity, is my data not backed up?
So there are no overage costs in as much as we provide a flat fee service. However, that flat fee service is computed based on the amount of capacity that you have, based on the amount of protected data. And protected data here is whether it's data or systems. And so if you're going to go over that, then you'll just have to upgrade your plan. And as long as you keep your plan, upgraded to the amount of need that you have, you're going to be fully protected.
Somebody was curious, where are your data centers located?
So we have 15 data centers. They're distributed across the globe. That includes 4 data centers in the United States. We have a data center in Canada, Australia, a couple in the United Kingdom, one in South Africa, others in Europe.